2019 strikes again. So, It Chapter 2 carries on the story from the first movie from 2017, and this movie takes place 27 years after the first one, where the kids from Derry are all brought back together and reunited after Pennywise and his mysterious acts start to come up again as they were foretold in the first movie, and this is them coming back together to take down Pennywise for the final time. Now, It Chapter 2 was probably one of my more anticipated movies of this year. I love It Chapter 1. I think that's an incredible little horror movie that just kind of came out of nowhere, really, because we all knew they were going to be making an It reboot at some point. Then they just kind of did it, and it was actually pretty amazing. So I was really excited going into Chapter 2, knowing this was going to be the second part of the story. This is where the adults come in. This is where they come in to tackle Pennywise, and also the casting and things like that. It was just a really exciting movie for me. And Chapter 2, I was a bit worried about going in, not only because of the reviews that I heard beforehand, but also just due to the fact that it's 2019, and quite frankly, most of the movies released this year have been disappointing that had any kind of anticipation linked to them. And It Chapter 2, while I feel like it is a good movie and a good follow-up to It Chapter 1, it's not quite as good as I hoped. Starting off with the positives though, the cast overall and the casting in particular is probably the best part of this movie, because we have all the adult versions of the characters in this movie, and that is really satisfying to watch, particularly because we have Jessica Chastain playing Beverly, which that was just a casting we all knew was going to happen. She just looks like Beverly, and also she is friends with Andy Muschietti, so we all knew that was going to happen. Then we have like James McAvoy as Bill, which is also great casting. Bill Hader as Richie, which is the older version of Finn Wolfhard. He is brilliant in this. This might be Bill Hader's best role. I mean, I haven't really seen Barry, the TV show that he does at the moment, but I really love what Bill Hader was able to do with the character of Richie in this movie. But also the actor, I can't remember the name of him now, but he's the older Jack Dylan Grazer. He is just brilliant in this. Like, that is some fantastic casting right there. And the casting overall is just very satisfying in this movie. It's very fun to watch these kind of older versions of these characters. And not only with that, but the performances themselves individually are all really good. I think everybody is very strong in this movie. There isn't really a weak link, except for maybe, I don't know, I guess the actor who maybe plays the older version of Ben, maybe. But, I mean, what's really fun with the older version of Ben is that obviously Ben in the first movie is kind of like the the little chubby kid, and then in this he's the super hot guy, and I think that's really fun to watch as well, watch his kind of character evolution, and especially his kind of love triangle between Ben, Bill, and also Beverly. I think that's a really nice little story that they have going on here. So just the performances, the casting is the best part of this movie, and it's extremely satisfying to watch on screen. And I can't talk a It review without talking about It himself, and that is of course Bill Skarsgard as Pennywise, and he's brilliant in this, just like he was in the first movie. He's just extremely creepy and eerie and scary, and just comes out, because it takes a very particular actor to kind of nail this kind of performance, and I feel like Bill Skarsgard just lends so much to this role, and it pays off well on screen. I would have liked to have seen a bit more of Pennywise in this movie. He's actually in it a lot less than I thought he was going to be, but given the fact that this movie is kind of like the final chapter, I was kind of hoping that we were going to get a bit more of him, but from what he is there, he is very good, and obviously leaves a great impression, as he did in It Chapter 1. Also, I think this movie actually might be more scary than the first movie. I feel like the scares in this came a lot more ferociously and a lot less sparingly than what they were in the first movie. I feel like the scares here, while they might be a bit more obvious, I feel like they are a lot more apparent, and I don't know exactly how I feel about that, because I feel like the scares in this movie, while I felt more genuinely scared watching this movie than I was in the first one, it kind of leads me into one of my first negatives for this movie. My first and major negative for It Chapter 2 is that while the scares are more prominent, they become very repetitive, because I'd say about 85% of the scares that come out of this movie are jump scares, and that is very lazy. It's very obvious to do. Jump scares are just a very easy way to get a scare out of an audience, because anybody can jump scare, because it's so easy to do, and it's a natural human reaction. So to kind of play on that so heavily, I find extremely lazy and very, very poorly handled, because they could have done a lot more with this in terms of psychological horror, but they just chose to go down a very basic, bare bones route with the horror, and that disappointed me. Like I say, although there were a few really good jump scares in there that really I felt were effective, most of them were just extremely obviously placed. You could count down from 5 as to when they were going to happen, and it just kind of lessened the impact of the horror overall, which the first movie didn't have. Also, this movie is nearly 3 hours long, and it's a very drawn-out story, and I feel like there was a lot in this movie that could have been cut. I feel like the 3 or nearly 3 hour runtime that this movie has isn't exactly necessary, it's not exactly earned, it's not exactly warranted, and I feel like that there's a lot of scenes in this where there's just characters walking around and just talking about pointless things that I just feel like could have been cut out from the movie to make it at least 20-30 minutes shorter, because the first It movie is about 2 hours 10, and that is a perfect runtime for that movie. And I feel like the It Chapter 2 kind of took liberties where it didn't need to, and went almost too far overboard with its runtime to the point where it's almost distracting. And I feel like the runtime, while they do cover a lot, and they do need to cover a lot in this final movie, it seems like the essential stuff they needed to cover almost got put into the back seat, and that was not actually covered as much as what you'd expect it to be for a movie that is 3 hours long. So I feel like the runtime, it was too drawn out for me. And like I say, given the fact that this movie is nearly 3 hours long, there's a lot of things that go unexplained. I was hoping to get a lot more of the lore behind the It movie in this particular film. I was hoping to get a lot more of the backstory of Pennywise. I was hoping to get a lot more explanation and diving into the history of Pennywise and the history of Derry, but that's really swept under the rug here. Like, it's really not focused on at all. And, based on the trailer, you think maybe you would get a bit of that, and there's a tiny bit of it, but it's really not much. And like I say, given the fact that this movie is 3 hours long, I would have much rather of them taken out a lot of the stuff, where there's just pointless conversations, and also I would have rather them just taken out the flashbacks as a whole. The flashbacks feel really superfluous in this film, and just replace that with backstory stuff with Pennywise, because that is far more interesting, and it would have given us a lot more screen time with Bill Skarsgard, which he desperately needed in this film. So I feel like the 3 hour runtime, I feel like it could have been necessary, but they didn't use it for the necessary reasons, and that is what is particularly frustrating with the runtime of It Chapter 2. And also, the character of Mike in this movie confused me, because Mike in this movie is the kind of replacement for, I believe it was Ben in the book. I think Mike has Ben's role, and I could be wrong there, but Mike is the one who stayed behind, and while everyone else left Derry, Mike is the one who stayed behind, and he is essentially just the exposition dumper. He comes out and just says lines of exposition just for many, many scenes, and to be honest, it kind of ruins Mike as a character, because Mike doesn't really have much else of a purpose than to be kind of the one who brings them together and just say everything that needs to be said. Particularly to the audience. It felt kind of pandering, and I didn't really appreciate what they were doing with Mike, because Mike has never really been a character. Even in the first movie, Mike was incredibly underused, and then in this movie, while he is used more, the way he's used isn't particularly honoring to the character and isn't exactly, reflective to the character. So I feel like that Mike, he's just a bit of a weak link among the characters, and I feel like that's a real shame, especially because I think his name's Asiya Mustafa. He is really good as Mike. I really like him as the older version. It's just that they completely use the character in a completely pointless way, in a completely superfluous way, where he's just there to say exposition, and while, yeah, that is important dialogue, they just didn't give him much else beyond that, and that was a real shame. Now, going over to the enjoyment side of this review, I feel like It Chapter 2 is definitely an enjoyable movie. It's definitely one that you can sit down and watch, especially if you like the first movie. You definitely want to see how it ends. You definitely want to see how, they're going to wrap up this story. So I feel like, if you want to go see this movie, definitely go see it. It's definitely one that you're going to want to check out. And I feel like from just a horror movie standpoint, it's definitely an entertaining one. Like I say, it's a bit more general than what I was expecting. It's a lot more of a generic horror movie in regards to its horror and scares. It's not exactly as psychological as maybe I was hoping to be, or even as much as the first movie is, but it's still a really good horror movie overall. It's well made, it's well shot, and it's well scripted, and I feel like for the most part, you are really going to be there for the performances, not only from, of course, Bill Skarsgård, but also from the main cast as well, who all deliver fantastic performances, and overall, it's definitely a give it a watch. Overall, It Chapter 2, while good, I feel is a little underwhelming. I do think the movie is good. It's not particularly great or fantastic, but it's a good follow-up to It Chapter 1. It has amazing performances. I just feel like the drawn-out runtime, the underused characters, and also particularly the repetitive scares just really bring the movie down a few pegs for me. And like I say, while the first It, I really hold up to quite a high standard, the second one didn't really come close to that for me. I think it's a good movie. It's just not a great movie, and I feel like it's a alright one, to follow up and just to have the ending. It's a decent enough ending. It's just not as good as it could have been, and it's a real shame when you look back at that and just kind of realize that, there could have been so much done there, and they kind of just left it to the side. So overall, I'm going to give It Chapter 2 a 6 out of 10. So have you guys seen It Chapter 2? If you have, make sure you let me know all your thoughts about it in the comment section down below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Let's have a conversation about this movie in the comment section down below. And as always, guys, if you want to see more movie reviews and movie-related videos like this, be sure to subscribe, and I hope to see you guys again next time.